I have 12 key terms that you can use on Pinterest to find some pretty amazing and trending design styles. And some of them you've probably been looking for, but you just haven't been able to like connect the words together to get the actual search result in Pinterest that you want. Let's go over these 12 searches together, and then towards the end of the video, I'm gonna actually show you how you can easily create some of these designs in Kittl. All right, so the first key term is retro pixels. So here we are in Pinterest. I'm going to type in retro pixels, and we're going to look at some of these. So this is a super, I think, current trending style, whether it is the type that you can see here, like 8-bit retro type, which by the way, we have a ton of these in Kittl. You can see here some more, or just the actual kind of pixel icons. And these would be more of what I'm talking about right here, like the actual pixelized style illustrations. And the best way I can define these is obviously like using pixel-based art or pixelization for your images and stuff that would be reminiscent of video game or arcade game era style art. Okay, and you can see right here, here's a great example right here. Retro arcade. This looks like some kind of overlay, 8-bit pixel style. This kind of stuff is really making a comeback, and I think the reason for that is one, nostalgia. I mean, this is such a nostalgic style with all of these different kind of games that you played maybe when you were younger, or if you are younger, obviously what the older generation played when they were younger. Typically this kind of style is going to have computery looking graphics, as you've probably already noticed, along with pretty limited color palettes and or muted color palettes that aren't necessarily super vibrant, even though they are in the RGB state. Since they're on a screen, I think it just made them a little bit more pleasant while you were playing it. For example, here you would maybe say that this is vibrant. You could definitely suggest that this is vibrant. However, I would say that these are actually a little bit more muted, especially right here, you know, beware the invasion, like these kinds of things. Like they are RGB, but at the same time, they're a little bit muted. And I think that translates really great into merch, which brings us to some use cases. So I have some use cases right here. These would obviously be ideal. These pixelized elements or fonts would be ideal for making nostalgic style or video game art. I mean, the video game niche is so big. There's endless amount of styles and endless amount of illustrations for different things that you could do, from mouse pads, t-shirts, obviously hoodies, apparel, things like that. But there are so many other niche things in the print-on-demand space, for example, that you could use retro pixel art, or just promotional materials for your social. Again, maybe you do the same thing. Maybe you have a YouTube where you're talking about video games and things like that. So you want to obviously find where the niche kind of fits the style. And by the way, I actually did a pretty lengthy video on how to achieve this style using Kittl AI. So using different key terms like 8-bit, 24-bit pixel art mixed with anime art, you can get some really amazing results in Kittl AI. So check out that video. It's right here in the cards for you. It was a lot of fun. I think you're going to have a lot of fun too. Okay, so our second key term is abstract expressionism. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter on that one. And this is definitely pretty intense. So the best way that I can kind of define this while you look at some of these references here is artwork that emphasizes kind of the spontaneity or this intuitive expression. Obviously, you can think about this in terms of emotion or the emotion that you feel when you look at something like this as an art piece. And I'm even thinking of stuff like right here, this is definitely that kind of expressionism mixed with collage, which is a great kind of example of how to achieve that. So you have these expressions through emotions, through art, obviously, and these designs use a lot of obviously very bold strokes, of a lot of very powerful colors, not necessarily always vibrant or loud colors, just very powerful. Okay, so you can see some really dark blues here, some really dark red. Obviously, you have your kind of dark threshold photography here, along with some shapes are going to be conveying emotions or concept through this piece of art. And so you can kind of get a sense as I scroll for the kind of mainstream color palettes that go along with this. Here's another example of those what I would call powerful colors. You have those dark oranges, tinged yellow, black, dark blue. Let's talk about some use cases for this. So some of the use cases I have are for creating a dynamic or emotionally engaging poster. Obviously, I think that's what you can get a sense of definitely as you scroll through this. And if you're in more of the graphic design versus the art, we're using artistic words here in this key term, but you're gathering references that will help you in your design project. So something that's going to be extremely and visually enticing. Also, album covers. I think album covers is a great avenue for this specific style, especially if we're going to use something like collage. I think that's been on the rise, collage in general. Also, we did a video on that, by the way. You can check it out right here in the cards on how to do collage in Kittl. Photography and these kind of paint splatters or paint splashes or bold strokes and marks mixed with some scrapped paper and typography lends itself well, especially to the album cover game. Now, we also can use this for a full brand identity or a dynamic identity, something that kind of feels like it's living and breathing. And I went through Patreon's new kind of dynamic identity, which you can see here in this video in the cards. And what they did was very, very different. They created an organic shape that kind of moves. It's never always one way. It morphs itself depending on the use case. And so you can take a lot of reference from here, a lot of ideas from this abstract expressionism, everything from just shape to the type to the cutouts, and of course the colors. Again, as I'm scrolling, hopefully you get a sense for the color palettes here. All right, so our third key term is going to be avant-garde design. Now, this isn't necessarily a super new concept or a new design style, as it essentially is kind of just going against norms if you kind of think about this art or design style. So as I scroll here, I'll just kind of define what I think best suits this style, and that's essentially experimenting with more unconventional layouts, okay? And I think you see that immediately here as I scroll through this. You're getting a sense for not super by the book, structured, completely left justified style stuff, okay? So you have these unconventional layouts, you have some rather explorative and loud typography, you have imagery that challenges norms, provokes thought, and the imagery could be people, it could also be shapes, it could be a mix of both, it could be nature. Some of the use cases for this, as you can see right here, a lot of them are actually kind of promotional, so you can see some flyers here, things like magazine covers, things like event posters and flyers, anything that's going to be put in a position to capture attention. This reminds me of like what a comic book or a magazine cover or an article cover might be, something like that. But also just posters and stuff in general, some of that kind of use case would be great. Now, a lot of this is also going to maybe remind you of another key term called Bauhaus, or Bauhaus, however you'd like to pronounce it, I think is fine. But you're going to see a lot of typography that's slightly similar. You can see this one, for example, from the 1923 exhibitions, probably kind of the staple poster child of that era. You can kind of mix these key terms together and I think can come up with some really, really cool stuff. As I start to scroll, you see more of that style start to take place in these references. All right, so our next search term is retro boho graphics. Now, obviously, if you type in retro graphics by itself, you're going to get one thing. If you're going to type in boho graphics by itself, you're going to get another thing. But we have found that combining retro and boho and graphics together give you really, really cool references specifically for type and for illustration, all of which, by the way, we pretty much pride ourselves in Kittl for having a ton of this. The best way we can kind of combine these terms together and define them would be the use of the bohemian-inspired motifs, incorporating those sort of muted, earthy color tone palettes, along with the more retro and vibrant and loud typography. And you can already see that as I kind of stop here. In this part of the search term, you're starting to see elements and colors that are reminiscent of boho, but when you scan across the page and look at a lot of the type, It's very retro in what you might think as 60s or 70s. Okay, so and you're basically merging those two together. And all this key term really does is pair two things that are already closely related, or at least the organic shapes pair themselves well. So a organic shaped font pairs well with organic shaped illustrations or shapes or masks or anything like that. As you can see right here, we have this kind of tombstone shape. It's very retro, but also very reminiscent of boho or mystical style stuff. Now, some of the use cases that would be great for some of the stuff that you're seeing, other than just, type or illustrations or stickers or something like that, would be a lifestyle brand. I think that you could easily attribute any of these things to creating a lifestyle or a travel brand. You have, for example, right here, you have a drink looking brand right here. So something that's a little bit more, maybe let's say refined than an energy drink, but a little bit more powerful than something that's like a cider or something, like somewhere in between, maybe like a kombucha brand or something like that could use something retro elements along with the boho style and the color palettes. Now, of course, you can think about this style in terms of events or the niches or the aesthetics that it fits. So you can think already music festivals, music merch. You can do anything that's going to have to do with product packaging, right? So again, that lifestyle brand type thing, or perhaps it's a drink, or perhaps you're even doing some sort of brewery or something like that. I think you could do some really, really cool stuff, as well as just branding in general. I think you could do really, really cool stuff with all of these elements in branding or website design. All right, so our next key term is surrealism design, and this was a little bit of a new one for me. I wouldn't exactly know how to express this other than having found the key term combination itself. What you're going to start to notice is essentially a very specific subset of collage. So if without scrolling, if we just look at this together from top left to bottom right, you already see a few main components. You're going to see photograph that's been cut away from its natural place, mixed with other photographs or elements and type, right? So these are the three things that have been morphed together to create this realistic perspective in a surreal way, or an ethereal way, or an imaginative way, giving you some sort of emotion. So another way that maybe I would define it is just visually striking, very dreamlike compositions. That's why I use the word like ethereal, and they often kind of defy reality. So it's kind of pitching things together that wouldn't necessarily go together already, which is why I think the word dream is a really, really good word. You could also maybe try key terms like dreamy design or dreamlike design and get something very different. For example, let's look at one that's really good. So we could say like, a car that is in the air flying, but also on fire, not necessarily going the same. A flower that has, extremely bulging muscles, doesn't go together. There are these ideas that are trying to be conveyed through what I would just call a subset of collage, is what I think it is. And you can do a lot of powerful things through collage because you can attach ideas together that don't normally go together. What would be some use cases for this? You are going to probably use this for album covers. That's kind of been a trend for the last 3 specifically, because these really hit on emotion or challenging you to think in a different way. I think that's what this design style specifically challenges you to do. And so album covers, book illustrations, something that's going to jump off that shelf or jump off the web page, I guess, if you're shopping online, to again challenge and invite the viewer, invite the reader to think about something in a different way. This design style can really accomplish that. Again, inviting the viewer to kind of provide an interpretation on what you are trying to achieve. Our next key term is punk poster. Now, we have done a couple videos on this kind of punk style and this punk rocker style before, so this probably isn't necessarily a new aesthetic or a new genre to you, but you might not have put this in Pinterest yet to really start getting some reference for this. So as I scroll through this, you're going to see some commonalities in not only color palette, but also just in the almost maximalist style poster design that you see right here. By the way, all of these keywords I'm giving you, you can add on to them, tack onto them to find exactly what you want. But you're going to find a lot of like scribbled out eyes. You're going to find a lot of really intense kind of scratchy or hand-drawn text or type. You're going to find like marker-like marks across the page. You're going to find ripped edges. You're going to find like these little, again right here, like ripped paper with, almost like ransom note letter type stuff. You're going to find really grungy, grainy looking stuff. And I don't really, I guess, need to define this anymore other than kind of what you're seeing. But it's this kind of rebellious attitude. That's kind of what you get right here. Oh, I'm super glad this came up because this is what kind of came in my mind. If you watched Across the Spider-Verse, you know that there's this character, Spider-Punk, that is like, very much like not conforming to the norms, right? And so you can kind of get that. The way they painted that character and just described it was awesome. So we have this, again, very rebellious, kind of against normal conventions aesthetic that you're seeing as we look at the punk poster stuff. You can see here like the grungy ripped paper effect is extremely common in this style. These are perfect for creating super edgy music event posters, very edgy album covers, for example. Maybe you are wanting to, or maybe you're just wanting to do different styles of collage and mix different elements from one design niche with another design niche, and you want to use things together like this, for example. All of those would be great, outside of also just figuring out how you can create merch for people that like this aesthetic, or maybe like the bands that perform this kind of aesthetic or have this, kind of heavy metal, rock, punk aesthetic. It would be great for all of those things. All right, so our next key term is packaging illustration. And while that might be super obvious of a thing, like I don't think people type in obvious things enough to see what's going on, because what's going to happen when you type in a key term like that is it is going to show you the most popular, the most relevant, the most trendy packaging designs that are at least happening at this current moment as it connects to illustration. So packaging and illustration, two very specific things. If you type in packaging, you're going to see some very specific things because you haven't given it any key terms. Here from the top left to the middle is this doodle style, which we also have a really great example of how to kind of turn your doodles into merch or apparel. You can check out that video right here, or tote bags, for example. The doodle style is really up and coming, and I think it's because it gives this very naive, down-to-earth vibe that people can connect with. They could look at something and they could say, "Oh man, I could probably draw something similar to that." I think there's this kind of emotional connection that people would want to see on packaging. And so as I scroll down here, you also get this kind of kitschy / retro style. If I look over here, you start to see some of the grainy star spot elements that are kind of retro. But the color palette itself lends itself to that kind of kitschy pink and blue, as we see across the board right here. Pink and blue, dark blue, orange, pink, pink and blue and red. It looks like there's some coffee and tea drinks. All of this for packaging would be fantastic. So, I mean, if you're looking for inspiration and you're anywhere close to the retro or the nostalgic or the editorial style and you need some inspiration, just typing in package illustration or packaging illustration is going to give you, looks like endless ideas for you to create your mood boards and use as references for your next project. So that already kind of takes care of a lot of different use cases, but if I wrote down a couple more, obviously food products, cosmetics, any consumer goods, anything that's going to enhance the visual experience of the viewer from the shelf, right? So they're going to see it on the shelf. So as I scroll right here, you can see right here, coffee. Okay, this is already going to jump out at you like way more than a kind of basic, perhaps Starbucks packaging that's that green and brown or whatever. This is going to look very inviting. It's going to look new. It's going to look trendy. It's going to look organic, for example, is another feature that I'm seeing. A very organic type, flourished or scripty, or, well, I guess organic is kind of the best way to describe it. Things like that. The use cases are obviously very wide reaching. They don't have to necessarily stay in the packaging. You could use this for your branding or logo design. You could use this for merch design. Absolutely. Let me know in the comments what else that you would see this as. I mean, there's a bunch of different styles happening here, but there's this kind of cohesive theme as we scroll, because Pinterest is really good at doing that, by the way. When you search something, it's already good at kind of orchestrating a similar style together. So you let me know down in the comments what kind of styles you're seeing first and foremost as we scroll for packaging illustration. All right, our next key term is another obvious one, hand lettering, okay? And so hand lettering has been big for a while. A lot more people have been getting into it. It's a little bit different than calligraphy, where calligraphy would be using a tool specifically to get your thick and thin strokes by making a stroke, lifting up your pen or your marker or whatever, and then using weight to create your next stroke, whereas lettering is kind of taking your time to create the entire shape of that letter and then filling it in. And so what this has done is opened up, one, a lot of amazing fonts and typefaces that have been created through different lettering styles, but also just its own sub-niche and sub-aesthetic and style that people absolutely love, from everything from merch, hoodie, apparel, hat, beanie, sticker design, everything like that, from packaging design, from book covers. Definitely, there's just so many different avenues because there are so many different styles of letters, everything from vintage to minimal and everywhere in between that, reaching far back from script and Lombardic and Unicile all the way up to super clean, grotesque, and modern, what you would call type. And being able to hand letter with your own style and technique creates another sub-letter style from that. And so, I mean, there's just so many use cases from this. It's almost too difficult to define. It's almost too difficult to trap to a specific use case, but we can also utilize it for invitations. Wedding invitations, for example, is a really big one. I believe this right here would be, let's see, yep, Tobias. So this is our founder's, some of his hand lettering work from our founder. I knew that was going to show up if I typed in hand lettering. I'm sure there's some more on here that is his as well. But for example, right here, you can see here, this isn't for an invitation, but for let's just go ahead and type that in. So invitation. Yeah, so you have everything from like let's party, be our guest. And I think they just really lend themselves. Everything from, oh, okay, here's a great one, save the date. Any holiday can utilize hand lettering really well for any cards or stationery. Book covers, poster designs, definitely wall decor, things like that. All right, we have another retro key term, and that is retro logo. And I'm going to give you a substitute for this one as well if you want something different. But why I like retro logo first to look at is, again, the type. We just talked about hand lettering. Now we're talking about typography that's a little bit more refined, a little sharper. So we have everything from retro type that is super sharp, okay? And so this is reminiscent, this example right here would be reminiscent of video game style art. So it almost looks like it fits in the video game pixel arcade style, but it could also fit obviously in retro, not only because of the type, but because of the colors and the assets that are being used with it. But we also have something like this off the record where we have this kind of almost psychedelic style type along with some very retro script typography that you don't necessarily see nowadays unless you're looking for it or connected with a brand that utilizes this style of design work. And so I think this is a great one to go and get references for typography choice, color palettes, and illustration type specifically. I think you can learn a lot from typing in retro logo and just going through and looking at. Now, what I'm seeing right now is actually a lot of new age stuff that's done in a retro style. So I'm not actually seeing, other than, okay, so this Kodak and this Pepsi one here are great examples. That's kind of what I was looking for. PlayStation. Okay, yeah, so there are some good ones. You got to scroll a little bit to find them. But as you can see, if we scroll up towards the top, you see all of these things that have been made in a retro way. Now, I'm going to give you a substitute for this one because I really like it. So if I type in retro advertisement, we're going to get similar colors, similar typography, similar illustrations, but in a completely different layout and orchestration. I actually made a video explaining how I took this one with the Converses and I made my own design template where you can set up a similar layout to that where you can easily replace the image or the illustration that's in the middle. But I love looking through this because you're not only going to get what you saw on the retro logo side of things, because you're going to see most likely a logo somewhere in the retro advertisement itself, but you're going to get layout ideas, you're going to get extra type lockup ideas, you're going to get extra illustration ideas, you're going to get layering effect, collage ideas. This one is fantastic. Let me know what you think of this one down in the comments. But pairing this along with just looking at retro logo is going to give you, man, just so much reference and so much influence on your design work. All right, so our next key term is minimalist streetwear. This one might throw you for a loop because when you think of streetwear, you might be tempted to think of something like this actually right here in the middle. You might be tempted to think of Y2K. And I think that's just one style of streetwear because streetwear is determined by the people that are wearing stuff on the street. And so that's going to be a lot of things if you think about it. If we just take streetwear at face value and say, what does that mean? It means stuff that people was wearing on the street. First and foremost, obviously I know that it's a design style itself. If you go out and you collect data, you're going to see a lot of different things from a lot of different people wearing stuff out on the street. Now, minimalist is one specific subset of design style when it comes to streetwear, and I think it's because it invites the user to try to figure out and see what's going on. It invites them to get closer because there's one central message that's being displayed outside of something that's very heavily streetwear, which I would actually compare with maximalist, where there's so much happening on the back of a hoodie or the back of a shirt where you could get close, but you still might not even be able to decipher what's happening, whereas minimalist streetwear has one kind of focal point. For example, we look at this one right here, we have a very streetwear style layout, but we have a little bit more minimal aesthetic to it. We only have two colors happening here. We have basically two styles of type here, and we have one illustration kind of with a checkered pattern. Okay, all right, here's another one, believe me, right? And with some sort of message, okay? So obviously minimalist streetwear is going to rely heavily on typography, as you can see here as we scroll down a little bit, but it's extremely different than what you might think of as regular streetwear. And I would look at something like this, for example, or something like this and say this is probably more reminiscent of that Y2K style streetwear. This one may be more reminiscent of like retro streetwear, something like that. This, I think, still fits the kind of minimalist streetwear because you have a minimalist style illustration. You have that kind of organic or minimal type, or just not a lot of type in general. This also fits that description. This fits that description, which is kind of just type lockups. We have a video on that as well for the highest performing, best selling minimalist streetwear in 3 different styles, 3 different techniques. You can check out that video right here up in the cards or linked down in the description. And our next one is muted color palette. And now that's another obvious one. I mentioned earlier that people probably aren't typing in obvious things as often as they should. So if you just type in muted color palette, you're going to obviously get ideas for muted color palettes. That's correct. This doesn't really need to be determined or defined as much as you just need to kind of look at it and decide if it's right for you. Things that come to mind when I'm going to define muted color palette would be something like probably earthy, more shades of tan and white and gray mixed with these kind of creamy browns and golds. Sand is obviously a good one. This kind of muted turquoise that you see right here. Anything that's essentially not vibrant, right? It's basically like taking a vibrant color and then just kind of turning it down to take that harshness out of it, right? And so there's so many different ideas and things you can utilize with muted color palettes. First and foremost, I would think would be the boho or the mystical or the retro that we've already looked at. You probably are kind of already picked up on that. When you type this in and you start scrolling, you say, oh man, this kind of looks like those color palettes that I was looking at in all of these other design styles, right? And so you could also use them for editorial layouts, website design, anything where you want to create more of an interior design style. So for example, right here, if we look at this one right here, we look at these two with this interior design, it's very calming, it's very alluring. It's very, but it's warm at the same time. So it's not cool in so much that it's like cold. It means that it's calming, but still warm at the same time. I actually did a video explaining some of that and the reason why it's good to utilize that in this video, or you can check that down in the description. So many different use cases for utilizing a muted color palette. And if anything, just kind of giving it a try. It adheres to so many things from retro, vintage, boho, mystical, editorial, nostalgic. I mean, they all kind of use this muted color palette style. All right, and so our last key term of the 12 is 3D abstract posters, and these three-dimensional graphics and abstract shapes that are obviously creating a very visually enticing, immersive composition. And it's really heavily experimenting with depth, perspective. As you can see light, for example, you can see light coming from different either perspectives or angles or what have you. I mean, they really experiment with the kind of trifecta there of depth, perspective, and lighting to create some really intense and visually enticing stuff. What you might think would be a limited use case, but if you kind of think past a magazine cover or a poster design, you could really open this up to a lot of different things, from branding elements and patterns to website elements. You know, everything from using these kind of organic, chromy, liquidy shapes, for example, with your brand or with your website or your social media or anything like that. It doesn't have to necessarily be super wild like some of the things that we saw up at the top. For example, it doesn't always have to be a poster design. It doesn't always have to be a social media post, a magazine cover. It doesn't always have to be a poster, for example. So you can start to take apart some of these, and that's where reference, influence, design ideas kind of come from, is saying like, oh, okay, I like this really cool kind of spirally, wiggly element. How would I utilize that kind of, going off the page on my website? Or, man, I really like this kind of like translucent rainbow mirror looking effect. How could I utilize that for maybe a social media graphic, or maybe I could use that for my book cover that has to do with, I don't know, a new perspective or something like that. I would just kind of open up your mind to what the use cases would be outside of just a poster design. Not everything has to be super tech heavy. It doesn't always have to be like a tech startup or a tech conference or something like that, even though a lot of this does feel very tech heavy. I think it also kind of fits with that dreamy, ethereal style that we looked at before. I think it goes hand in hand with that. All right, so those were the 12 key terms that we were searching in Pinterest, and I mentioned earlier that I was going to show you how you can easily utilize these styles and actually design these things in Kittl, especially after you've collected some of these references. So what I'm going to do is hop over to the Kittl homepage. For example, you can just kind of scroll on yourself and already start to pick up on some of the styles that we looked at. So for example, we've kind of got that retro style, we've got some streetwear style, here's like kind of the boho style. So you can kind of scroll the homepage and get a sense for a lot of different styles actually, but you can also just use our search term here. So let's say we're going to type in punk. I'll just start with punk. You're going to get a lot of stuff that is reminiscent of those punk posters that we looked at. For example, right here we have this one. It says punk not dead, punk spirit, join the punks. Like, look at this. All of this, for example, is readily available for you to utilize. I can click on this to immediately open it. I can click on this little eye to look at some other designs that are very similar. But for example, if I just want to use this, I can easily click into this design and start changing it to be however I want. If I don't want this to, or whatever is forever, I could just easily, click into here and say is never, and so you can easily click into any of this stuff and change all of it. I could change this to whatever I want. I could start changing my colors to be something completely different. And if you're a Kittl user already, you probably know all of this, but this is just an easy way for you to get in and start figuring out how to construct your own design from the references that you looked at from the key terms, because it's super easy to do this in Kittl. I'm going to type in invitation here, and see what comes up for invitation. You can start to see some of the hand lettering style, for example, right here or over here, or this one right here. You see this kind of handwriting and hand lettering style that you might want to use for your party, your invitation, your wedding invite, save the dates, whatever it is, for example. So you can play around with Kittl's search box there to find the aesthetic or the style that you want, and you can start with a template and easily kind of use your reference as a guide that you found from Pinterest and orchestrate and figure out your own design. And by the way, if you want to sign up to Kittl to use the paid plan, the pro plan with a bunch of other features, I have a promo code for you, a percentage off of your first purchase if you would like to do that. So check that out down in the description or the comments as well. Now, I hope this video was helpful for you going through these key terms. Hopefully I can do more of these maybe as the months go by and we find new key terms. Let me know if this was helpful for you down in the comments and what other type of content that you would want to see as it relates to finding references, design inspiration, creating your own designs. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Kittl so you don't miss any other videos just like this one, and we will see you in the next video.